One winter night in the early 90s, a few mates and I were squeezed around the only free table, which we shared with an older man who looked like part of the furniture. My friend was holding forth on the grim science of flat hunting in the city. The man had been quiet, nursing a half pint, but when one of us quoted an outrageous deposit for a mildewed single end, he smiled into the dregs of his drink. My boldest friend spoke up. "Something funny about our housing crisis?" The man looked up, his eyes crinkling. "Aye, you could say that," he said after a long pause, his voice gravelly. "Be grateful it's just damp and greed. My first flat, well, it came with a story that would make any landlord's worst offer sound like a blessing." The lot of us, always keen for a story on a rainy night, needed no further encouragement. We bought him a fresh pint. He introduced himself as Alistair, and with a slow sip, he began to speak. It was the winter of 1972. I was young and broke, left home to be a musician. Not that I had much talent, but I had even less talent for farming. The landlord knew that flat was a hole, greedy bastard, but it was cheap and I was desperate. I found it in a crumbling sandstone tenement just off the high street, a stone's throw from the necropolis. You know the type. 4 stories of soot-stained stone, those big bay windows staring out like dead eyes. The flat was a classic single end, 1 room, a kitchenette, and a shared toilet on the landing. It was grim, but it was mine. The first bedroom I'd ever had to myself. I spent my first proper day there, arranging my few possessions with a care I'd never taken with anything. My guitar in the corner, my small stack of records, my one good jacket on a nail behind the door. The first couple of weeks I was out busking, making new friends, even chatting up a girl sometimes. I'd bought a bottle of cheap whiskey and a single good candle that made the drafty windows seem romantic. Sitting in that one room late into the night, with the city humming distantly below, I felt like I'd finally arrived at my own life. One night, a night so cold that I'd not bothered going out, I heard it. A sound so faint at first, I thought it was the wind whistling through a cracked window pane again. But it grew. It was a baby, wailing. It came clear as day through the wall I shared with the neighbouring flat. A thin, reedy, inconsolable crying that started around midnight and went on for hours. Happened the next night too, and the night after that. I'm a sound sleeper, but this, it got under your skin. It was the sound of pure misery. After the 3rd night, the lack of sleep was a constant buzz behind my eyes. By the end of the week, I was a ghost. I'd doze off while busking, my fingers slipping on the strings, and I took to wandering the city after midnight because the silence of the streets was better than the noise waiting for me at home. So I decided to be a good neighbour. I thought, maybe a young mother was struggling in there, all on her own. Maybe she just needed a hand, someone to watch the wee one for an hour so she could get some kip. The thought made the crying seem human, something I could fix. I knocked the next afternoon, softly at first, then more firmly when no one answered. "Hello? Everything all right in there?" Nothing. I tried again later that evening, thinking she might be avoiding rent collectors. I put my ear to the door, but I heard no footsteps, no shushing, no sound of life at all. The only thing that answered my knocks was the dust sifting down from the door frame. That's when I resorted to ambushing my elderly neighbour, Mrs. Gable. I'd seen her shuffling to the shared toilet on the landing, a tiny woman lost in a worn-out dressing gown. "Morning," I said, too brightly. "I don't mean to bother you, but the flat next door, the one that's meant to be empty. I keep hearing a baby crying in there." The change in her was instant. Her friendly, wrinkled face went as blank and smooth as a stone. She clutched the collar of her dressing gown tight at her throat. "It's nothing, lad," she said, starting to turn away. "It's just the pipes." The soft click of her front door left me alone at the end of the hallway, all the doors in between seeming to stretch away into infinity like funhouse mirrors. I was losing the plot. That night, the wailing began, same as always. I'd tried whiskey, I'd tried pillows over my head, I'd tried playing my guitar until my fingers were raw. Nothing worked. I was hollow, a shell of a man, scraped out by that endless, lonely cry. In the pitch black, something in me finally broke. I wasn't a musician, or a tenant, or a rational man anymore. I was just a raw nerve. And then I did a foolish thing. I pressed my palm flat against the peeling wallpaper, right where the sound seemed loudest. I leaned my forehead against the plaster and whispered, "Shh, it's all right. I'm here. I'm not leaving you." The crying stopped. The silence was immediate and absolute, a held breath. I stood there, frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. For 1, 2, 3 heartbeats, there was nothing. Then it started again. But not from deep within the other flat. This was different. Closer. Wet, hiccuping little sobs that sounded as if they were coming from right under my hand. It was the sound of a child settling. I sat on that floor until my arse was numb and I'd lost track of the hours. At some point, I slipped into sleep. Sweet, blessed sleep. And how grateful I was for a taste of it at last. When the grey light finally came, I found myself shivering on the floor, but my palm was still pressed tight against the wall. It wasn't until I heard the flush of the toilet and the shuffle of Mrs. Gable's slippers that I pulled myself up and lurched towards the door. "It answered me," I blurted out. The words were out before I could stop them. "Last night, I put my hand on the wall, and it moved closer." She stopped with her hand on the door of her flat and slowly turned her head to peer at me down the hall. Her old eyes searched my face for a long moment and must have seen something there. I couldn't tell if what she found had frightened her or comforted her. Maybe both. Her defiance drained away, replaced by the weary resignation of someone who has a dirty job to do. "You best come in then," she sighed. Her single end was a mirror of mine, but choked with a lifetime of possessions. The air smelled of mothballs and weak tea. She didn't offer me any. She just pointed a bony finger at a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It showed 2 young women, arms linked, smiling shyly. They were standing on the very pavement outside our tenement. One was a dark-haired beauty with a hand on a pram. The other was a younger, softer-faced Mrs. Gable. "That was Morag," she said, her voice flat. "My friend. Before. She moved in after her man never came back from the war. Had a wee one. A boy." She fell silent, staring into the dead hearth. "What happened to her?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Mrs. Gable's gaze was distant. She was alone too much. The Wayne cried and cried. And this place, it gets into your head. She started saying things, that the fairies had come in the night and taken her real son, leaving that thing in his cradle. She said its eyes were old, that it was a cunning wee changeling. The old woman wrapped her arms around herself. We told her she was talking nonsense, but she stopped coming out. The crying stopped too. We hoped she'd taken the bairn and left. She turned to look directly at me, and her eyes were full of an old, settled grief. The factor roused her eventually, late with the rent. She was still in the flat, but she was gone, babbling about how the fairies would give her baby back, how they'd come back for their own if she made a wee room for it. They found a space in the wall next to the fireplace in her flat. She'd bricked it up fresh. She pointed to a small cupboard next to her own hearth. "You'll have one of these. We all do." My blood ran cold. I thought of the shallow cupboard in my flat, the one where I kept my shoes, the one where Morag had laid bricks and her dying baby. "They took her to Gartnerville," Mrs. Gable whispered, and we all agreed. We told the factor, we told the police, we told each other. It was just a story, a sad story about a woman who lost her mind, because the other truth, the one about what she might have put in that wall, was too much to live with. She looked at me with weary pity. "So now you know, and you'll learn, as we all did, to live with it." I thanked her, though the words felt like ash in my mouth, and stumbled back into my own flat. I understood now, but understanding was a curse. The story didn't stop the sound. It gave it a name, a history. That night, the crying wasn't just a noise. It was a boy. It was Morag's wee son, walled up in the dark. I dragged my bed against the wall and lay down on it, cautiously, as if it might swallow me whole. Tonight, that pitiful call felt like a question, and I did that foolish thing again, put my hand against the wall and whispered an answer. Alistair fell silent, staring into the middle distance. The cheerful pub noise felt like an intrusion. "That was a long time ago," he said, his voice soft. "And I still live there." A stunned silence fell over our table. "You never left?" I asked, the question feeling foolish the moment it left my lips. He gave a small, sad shake of his head. How could I? Someone has to listen. Someone has to be there so the wee lad isn't alone in the dark. He finally looked at us, and his eyes were faded and kind and utterly resigned. "It's not a bad life. The crying, it still comes, most nights, but it doesn't last long now. I just go to the wall, and well, you know." He set his empty glass down with a final gentle sigh. The story was over. We offered to buy him another, but he declined, saying he had to be getting back. We watched him pull on a worn jacket and shuffle out into the rainy night, going home to keep his vigil. The familiar bar suddenly felt different, like we'd been shown a crack in the world, and through it had glimpsed something small and desperate and forever trapped in the dark. My friend, the one who'd been complaining about his flat hunt, stared into his pint. "I think I'll stay where I am," he said.